Please welcome to the stage Linda Mashburn. She is going to speak on faith, not belief. Everyone? Linda?
First, let me just say that I chose that first hymn, Joyful, Joyful, because it was Bill's all-time most favorite hymn. He loved to sing it, he loved to play it, and he chose it for the recessional for our wedding 52 years ago this month. So I sort of chose it in honor of him. And also I want to make a slight apology to those who were here and heard me make a talk in 2017, because I'm recycling some of the things I said then. And so if they are familiar, please forgive me. I want to start by quoting a short piece from the UU magazine written by Megan Kajitani. Quote, "My 11-year-old Sienna's call came when she found 2 malnourished sea lion pups on a local beach. My 8-year-old Cal's call came from news about Syrian refugees. Another child, Harrison, felt a call when he learned about factory farms. Megan's call came when she discovered her friend's anaphylactic food allergies." Continuing the quote, "Each child took actions, large and small. Sienna made a book, Megan gave a speech, Cal donated to UU Rise, and Harrison went vegetarian. When I asked friends on Facebook to share their children's," this is again continuing the quote, "when I asked friends on Facebook to share their children's stories of acting for compassion and justice, the anecdotes that poured in brought me to tears. Children moved to act for gender and marriage equality, other children's feelings, wild cats, for Native American water protectors, polar bears, siblings in foster care. These young people wrote letters, made donations, spoke up in stores, lunchrooms, and school buses, fed the hungry, marched in protests, on and on." Unquote. The article made me think of my own children's actions to support issues they believed in. My oldest, after finishing advanced degrees in music, ran a music program that made sure there was always a way for low-income families to enroll their children in the program, either by scholarships or in her own studio by bartering everything from garden produce to a skilled service for lessons. My other daughter, whom I'd involved in building habitat houses starting when she was 8, spent a year volunteering with the Habitat International office in Americus, Georgia. I guess what struck me initially in this story was the use of the word call, which had always had a religious connotation for me. When I was young, a call in my Presbyterian church referred to what a minister got when he was summoned by God to become a pastor. And of course, it only got delivered by God to males. As I got older and my director of Christian education, a woman, became one of the first women ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, my understanding of a call began to broaden. In fact, by the time I finished high school, I understood that one might feel called to a number of vocations besides Christian ministry. And of course, both men and women could receive a call. In fact, the word vocation implies a call with its Latin root for the word. You might wonder what any of this has to do with the topic for today of faith. But please be patient with me. Let me go back again to those early understandings of religion that I had in my youth. What I understand of faith could more accurately be described as belief. You know, do you believe in God? Yes meant you had faith. No meant that you doubted. Do you believe in the divinity of Jesus? Another test of faith. Or the virgin birth, or the Trinity. All were questions of faith when I was young, and the opposite was doubt or lack of faith. However, as I have experienced life, I no longer equate belief or doctrine with faith. There might be a small relationship there, but they are definitely not the same thing. I want to read another quote to you, and this is from the New Testament. There's a parable that Jesus told, and it's found in Matthew 21:28. A man had 2 sons, and he went to the first and said, "Son, go and work in the vineyard today." And the son answered, "I will not." But afterward he repented and went. And the father went to the second son and said the same. And that son answered, "I go, sir." But he didn't go. And then Jesus asked, which of the 2 sons was faithful? Of course, the answer is obvious. The message to me from the parable is that faith or faithfulness isn't so much what is in your head in the way of belief systems or on your lips if you say a creed on a Sunday morning in church, but what you do, whether you go to the vineyard or not, when called. So going back to those calls the children received that motivated them to action, I think we need to add a little passion to the perceived need in order to turn it into an act of faithfulness. I was probably in my late 40s or maybe even 50 before I began to understand this difference between faith and belief. So then I began to try to figure out what in my life had really required faith. Or another way of thinking of it, willingness to risk. What is it that you're willing to risk your life? Or maybe not your life, but your economic security. Or maybe just your comfort for. What are you willing to risk embarrassment for? Or money that you would really like to use for a luxury? That is why I suggested that maybe we should add a measure of passion to the call that the children received, because it takes some courage to do some of the things they did. Unless one feels a level of passion about an issue, one isn't likely to speak out in public or go up against an authority figure or even part with some of one's own small allowance or babysitting money. So what had I felt passionate about enough to take some risks? Now, you who have heard me speak before and know some of my story might immediately offer the arrest in Columbus, Georgia that led to my serving a 3-month prison sentence. But frankly, that wasn't at the time such a great risk because I knew exactly in advance of how the scenario would play out. And I'd even spent time visiting at the prison I knew I would be assigned to. It might have been an act of faith, but it certainly wasn't the riskiest one I had taken. And I guess some might consider setting out to work at a hospital in India at age 22 a risky, faithful journey. But I was part of the Peace Corps generation, and that didn't seem risky at all to me at the time, although I did end up on the border during the Indian-Pakistan War of 1965. No, I had to say that the one fraught with the most risk was the one I acted out when I was a single woman late in my 20s. In 1970, I was running a program for the Presbyterian Church in Appalachia called Health Fairs. It involved working with grassroots groups around the region to lay plans for using teams of medical volunteers from northern Presbyterian churches during the summer months and a truckload of health education materials donated by national health groups. The region for me was loosely defined as eastern Kentucky, eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, southwestern Virginia, and all of West Virginia. So over 4 summers, I fielded 40 volunteer health teams into 40 communities to do these health fairs, spending 6 months of the year helping the communities decide how best to use these resources. I also followed up afterward to work with the communities on plans to meet their needs. It was mainly a job of community organizing, and in the process, I learned a fair amount about healthcare in Appalachia. Or maybe I should say, the lack of it. By 1970, I'd learned that there were very few physicians under 50 years old in the poorest and most rural counties. That some of them had practices serving 10,000 or more patients. That a few doctors in those counties saw as many as 100 patients a day. And that hospitals could turn away patients in the emergency room if they had no cash or method of payment. With few exceptions, all physicians were in private practice, which meant that the 3 doctors in Jackson, Kentucky, could all take a vacation the exact same week and leave the county of 20,000 people without a single source of medical care. This was actually the case when I visited one time. But I also saw some great examples of medical care being provided. For example, through the Frontier Nursing Service out of Hazard, Kentucky, which had nurses and nurse midwives stationed in a half-dozen remote communities around Hazard. The nurses had legal authorization to treat a number of acute illnesses, as well as monitor the chronically ill, using a set of policies and protocols that its 2 physicians in Hazard at the hospital had developed. A model that nurse practitioner training would follow. So over the 4 years of work organizing health fairs, I learned something about what worked and what didn't work in rural Appalachia. During the summers of 1969 and 1970, I had coordinated health fairs in a town of 600 people located a difficult hour's drive from Asheville, North Carolina, about a 45-minute drive from Newport and Greenville, Tennessee, the closest sources of medical care. Smaller communities up hollers around Hot Springs had an hour and a half to medical care. The Community Action Agency and local citizens had been very enthusiastic about organizing the health fairs and impressed me with their willingness to do the hard work of organizing a more permanent facility. There was an old clinic building in the town that had been used by 3 different privately practicing physicians during the 1950s. None had stayed longer than 2 years, many much less. And the building had deteriorated in the 10 years it had been empty. The Community Action Agency rented the building from its owner in 1969 for $1 a year and repaired the simple concrete block structure. So the leap of faith I took was to quit my job at the end of 1970 and move to Hot Springs with savings of $3,000 to work with the community to organize the Hot Springs Health Program. It took a year and 3 months before I was able to draw a salary again. But in a year and 9 months, we had 3 medical clinics in the western part of Madison County, a dental clinic, a home health agency, and a full-time staff of 20, including a physician, a dentist, lab technician, nurses, and 1 nurse practitioner. We also had 2 nurses in training at Chapel Hill to become nurse practitioners in the 2nd class of trainees, and they were scheduled back to work for the program in 3 more months. In that time frame, I also started dating Bill, and we had become engaged. I'm happy to say that the program is still in existence and, in fact, provides medical care for the entire county now, not just the western half, because it has taken over the practices of the physicians who eventually retired in Marshall and Mars Hill. It now has a staff of over 150 full and part-time people and has replaced all the original clinic buildings with more modern health centers. Another story of faith that inspired me and maybe led to my own decision to move to Hot Springs is that of Focus, which was the sponsoring organization for the Elder Spirit community. And some of us in the congregation are part of that community. Focus grew out of a decision by 80 nuns in 1967 to leave their order of 100 nuns. 50 of those women formed a nonprofit to continue their work in the Appalachian region, work that they had especially felt called to do. The order they left was a relatively new one, only founded in the 1940s. Many had joined right out of high school before getting a college degree. Almost all the leadership of the order were among the 50 who left and formed Focus. The acronym stands for Federation of Communities in Service. Catherine Rumschlag, the Mother General of the order, assumed that position at age 28, which shows you how young an order it was. And in 1967, when they left, was roughly 40 years old. Why did they leave? If you want the full story, you need to read the book that Helen Lewis, who used to be a member of this congregation before she died, and Monica Appleby, my next-door neighbor, wrote, called Mountain Sisters. But in a sentence or two, it was because they lost control of the work that they felt called to do. Most of the sisters had been exposed to the principles of community organizing, and they were carrying out the practices with low-income Appalachian groups wherever they were living, helping organize around strip mining, black lung, health care, education, etc. And because they were living and working in a generally non-Catholic region, they wanted to greatly modify their habits, their clothing, and change the rules they were being forced to live with, like not eating with their neighbors who invited them in, not being able to welcome folks into their residence, no evening meetings, etc. And these are the kinds of changes that Vatican II had authorized. The Bishop of Cincinnati not only refused permission for these changes, but got the Vatican to authorize putting a priest in charge over the order. So they left. I can only imagine what courage and faith in their own calling to service this departure from a safe haven must have taken. Luckily, they were the leaders, so they rightfully and successfully bargained for some of the financial assets of the order. As a result, the early Focus organization paid for Catherine to finish her college education and loaned money to others for the same purpose. It also made car loans, etc., to enable members to have jobs in remote communities. Some members who immediately found paid work in their communities generously gave large portions of their salaries to support the nonprofit, including paying a salary to Monica, its first president. I met Focus members 6 months after they left their order, having just taken the full-time job with the Presbyterian Church to coordinate health fairs. They greatly facilitated my work because they put me in touch with all the grassroots groups that they were working with. Plus, they gave me hospitality as I traveled around the region. And we were all, with a few exceptions, in our late 20s and early 30s, and single. I joined the organization in another year and a half. Without a doubt, their courage and faith, as well as the use of their nonprofit organization to channel my earliest funds, helped me launch the Hot Springs Health Program. Their faith and willingness to risk didn't dim with age. With Focus backing, Dean Peterson, with the help of Catherine Rumschlag and other Focus members, launched Elder Spirit in its unique form of a mixed-income, spiritually diverse community for older adults. One time, about 10 of the Focus members, 10 of us, were doing a workshop together, and we made a list of nonprofit organizations we had helped birth. The number came to 50 out of that small group. I would imagine that everyone in this room has a story to tell about when they heard a call about some issue, a problem, a need, or a challenging job, and took a risk, a leap of faith. To respond, probably because it triggered your response to one of the values we pledge allegiance to as UU members. After all, some of the most important decisions we make are leaps of faith. Marriage, having a child, changing jobs, or moving to a new community. You might also tell of some successful ventures, but you might also talk about some failures, because the greatest amount of risk requiring the greatest amount of faith is when the chance of failure is greatest. Mother Teresa said, "God does not require that we be successful, only that we be faithful." She also thought in terms of actions in that statement, not doctrine. So failure is going to accompany faithfulness, and we shouldn't be embarrassed about it. Many would say that my protest against the School of the Americas and the 3-month prison sentence I received was a failure, because the school still trains Latin American soldiers. But it did get rid of the torture manual they used. Which brings me around to belief again. Although I see a great difference between belief when it refers to doctrine and faith, there is an element of belief involved in faith and faithfulness. We must have a commitment to the values we are acting upon and a belief in the truth of our understanding of the situation. And I would add that there is a spiritual side of faith and faithfulness. When we feel called and are acting in what we regard as a faithful way, we feel empowered, sometimes through what we feel as a divine force, sometimes through the encouragement of other people, sometimes through the way the pieces fall into place. So I encourage you to think about the ways and times in your life that you felt called and acted upon that call, whether it resulted in success or possibly failure, out of which you learned important lessons and tried again in faithfulness. We might also think about what values we feel most strongly called to today and in what we are prepared to risk for them. How strong is our faith? And that's where I'm going to quit.